Shri Sai Ram. Good morning, perfect English students. Today we have the great honor and joy to study a poem called To the Foot from Its Child. This was written by Pablo Neruda, and he was known as the people's poet. He wrote beautiful poetry and beautiful stories. Before we get into the poet himself and into the story, I'd like to do the pre-reading activity. And the pre-reading activity has to do with metaphors. Pablo Neruda loved metaphors. In fact, this whole poem is a metaphor about the foot being the life of a child and how it goes from being born into a childhood, into adulthood, getting old, dying, and being reborn. So in our pre-reading activity, it says some parts of the body are normally attributed metaphorically. The heart. What do we attribute the heart to? To our emotions. It's a metaphor for our emotions. And the head. What is the head attributed to? The head is attributed to reason. Okay? And then it goes on further. What do the other parts of the body, what are they metaphorically associated with? So let's look at the feet. The foot. The foot is used for walking. It's used to get you places. So we have walking away. When you're walking away, you use your feet. When you're under the feet, okay, that means you're below the body. It's a nice simile, or it's a nice metaphor for being underneath the foot of whoever you're talking about. And there's also cold feet. For instance, you have something that's very scary, going into war. Some soldiers get cold feet. They're afraid to move their feet towards the war front. Now shoulders, we have our shoulders, and what are they used for? Basically to carry things, to lift things. We have a bag of rice. Where do we put the bag of rice? On our shoulders. And you can also look over your shoulder. You look behind you and see who's behind you. That's over the shoulder. Another way to use the shoulder is if a person has an attitude, and is not being nice, okay, and he's bragging about something, they say he has a chip on his shoulder. The hand is a beautiful metaphor for many things in life. Physically, we can walk hand in hand with our parents, with the people we love. We can hold hands. We can give somebody a hand. This is a metaphor. When you say, I want to help you, I'm going to give you a hand. Okay, you're not actually giving your hand, you're using your hands to help the other person. And then the best of all is the eye. The eye is the mirror of your soul. The eye tells so much. A person that can read eyes can see what the person is thinking, what the person is like, maybe what can even happen to the person. So there's gentle eyes, there's loving eyes, and there's eyes that jump around. They jump away from one thing to another thing. So all of these parts of the body are used in prose and poetry. And Pablo Neruda uses that during this poem quite a bit. Then further in the activity we ask, what do the following expressions mean? The first expression is stand on one's own feet. When we grow up, even when we're teenagers, our parents help us a lot. Our family helps us a lot. We have uncles, aunts, so many people. They help us get into school, help us get our driver's license, help us learn how to bicycle, help us so many different ways. But after you get to be 20 or so, or maybe 25, it's nice to be able to stand on your own feet. You don't require the help. And so these teenagers and early 20-year-old people that are living at home, they can't expect their parents or their mother to come in and clean up their room. They have to start standing on their own feet. They have to take charge of their own life. The other one is to have a brave heart. The heart, as we told about before, is associated with the emotions. So emotions go across the board. There's bravery, there's being afraid, there's love. So a brave heart is a person that will go and stick behind what he believes in. He will be brave. He can go into war. When his country is being attacked, he can be brave. He can be like one of the Pandavas and fight against the evil. In cold blood, this is very interesting. Blood is going through our body. It's usually the temperature of our body. And sometimes people are hot-blooded. That means their blood is boiling and they get mad. But cold blood is the opposite. That's when you're in your head and you're thinking about things without using your heart. In cold blood, you would commit a murder. You would figure out how to kill somebody. That's what they call cold blood. And then we have to take to one's heel. If we go into a situation where it's a little scary, okay, there's a fight going on or some big fire or explosions, you want to take to your heel. You want to take to your feet and start running away as fast as you can. And that's what the take to your heel means. So now let's go and understand a little bit about the author. Pablo Neruda, 1904 to 1973. He was born in Chile and lived most of his life in Chile. But he was a poet when he was very young. When he was just a teenager, he would see things in poetry. And so he had a Chilean name. His name was Neftali Ricardo Reyes Basolato. So that's a long name. And later on, he read about a poet named John Neruda from Czechoslovakia, and he thought, wow, Neruda is such a nice name. And eventually, he changed his name from Reyes Basolato to Pablo Neruda. And after he changed his name, in 1971, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which is a very sought-after prize. And he was addressed and voted to be such a good poet and writer by all of his peers. In fact, one of his peers translated this work that we're going to study today, From the Foot to the Child, because it's a very profound poem and gets you to think and contemplate about what your life is and what happens during your life. So he was recognized when he was young. He wrote his first book when he was only 20 years old. He wrote a book of poems called 20 Poems and a Song of Despair. When he was so young, he was looking at the realistic nature of the world. So when he got to the point of being about 45 to 50 is when he wrote this poem, To the Foot from its Child. By this time, he had had a lot of life experience, and he saw the way life was going in the middle 50s in Chile. And this is about 70 years ago, so it's 3.5 generations ago, and time marches on. Time has changed a lot. But he was writing for the society in his day. So we start into the poem, To the Foot from its Child. The first words are, the child's foot is not yet aware it's a foot. We've all seen babies in their cribs. They're just born. And then after a few days, they start kicking and moving their hands and moving their feet. But your legs grow 5 times from when you're a baby until you're an adult, okay? So the feet are very small, and they're kicking in the air. And so these feet are so cute. The toes are very small. They look like a little flower. And he's kicking these toes in the air and these feet in the air. And the baby hasn't been trained yet. He doesn't know what this foot is. So he's thinking from past lives, reincarnation's a theme in this poem. He's thinking, wow, I wonder what that is. And sometimes he'll even grab the foot and suck on the foot and play with the foot and have a good time with it. But he doesn't know what the foot is. He thinks it could be a butterfly or an apple. This is the first thoughts he's having when he sees this foot. And then just from that nice idea that he has and this belief that he could be a butterfly or an apple, Pablo Neruda goes right into the reality of the world. On the third line, he says, but in time, okay? In fact, this whole play is about time. This whole poem is about time. And he says, in time, stones and bits of glass, streets, ladders, and the paths in the rough earth go on teaching the foot it cannot fly, cannot be a fruit bulging on the branch. So in a few lines, he brings this child from its ideas, its goals, its thoughts, its imagination, down to a little bit of reality. Because what happens when you get a year or two old, your parents start walking you. And originally they walk you where you don't need shoes, okay? But eventually you go outside. And everybody knows in every city there's stones and bits of glass, unfortunately. So people put on shoes, or at least slippers, okay? The streets are paved with asphalt, with rocks, with so many different things to make it hard so that automobiles and cars and bicycles can go over the street. But it's not kind on your feet. So, and then ladders. Now ladders here means a number of things, okay? The ladder of your education, you start off in grammar school, and then you go to high school and college, maybe postgraduate school, and then learn about your job. So the ladder of school is going up. And then after a while you get your job and then it starts going down to reality. There's a ladder of your life. You start off young, you have a small body, you get a bigger body, better body, and you get to be an adult, and then the ladder goes downhill. You get to be older, you start shrinking in size. So the paths on the rough earth, what does that refer to? This refers to the problems that come during your life. You have a problem getting an apartment to live in, away from your parents. You have a problem with your job. So many problems and challenges are there. And Neruda is showing you these problems and what it does to you. Then it shows you that you cannot fly anymore. You can't be a fruit bulging and growing on a tree. You've got to be a little bit practical. So, bit by bit, it grows. The child's foot is defeated, okay? It's not bulging on a branch anymore. It falls in the battle. The battle is it wants to be something besides a foot. It wants to do something with its life. But it's defeated. The people come, the uncles come, society comes and tells you, no, you have to be in a shoe. And what does this shoe really represent, okay? The shoe represents society. It is a discipline. The child has to conform with customs. And then as soon as he starts wearing a shoe, he sees his life through the veil of a shoe. He cannot even see his other brother who he was born with or sister who he was born with. He's stuck in a shoe. Most of them are completely enclosed. So this foot, which is a metaphor for life, it takes away this child's free spirit. And then the child has to go through his life and then get reborn again to capture its free spirit. It's imprisoned in a shoe, and it goes from being a beautiful little flower to an old, ugly, wormy foot. So this poem goes through time shifts, and we'll go back to the time shift and what happens. The most important thing you have to remember about this shoe is that the perception of the shoe, when you're in the shoe, is partial. It's not a complete perception. It's incomplete. You can't see what's really going outside. You're stuck in a confined area. And then the foot, when it's stuck like this, feels confined. It feels defeated. And it feels condemned, like a prisoner. But bit by bit, in that dark, it grows. It grows to know the world in its own way. Instead of being outside and free, it grows inside the shoe. And it only knows the perspective inside the shoe, which is cut off and not free. Out of touch with its fellow. Its own brother, it hardly ever sees the brother until at night when it goes to sleep. Or maybe when they take a bath or go swimming. Most of the time, he's out of touch with his father, with his brother. And feels out of life like a blind man. You know, the sight is 80% of your input. So a blind person, they can still hear things, they can feel things, but 80% of the perception is gone once you're blind. And that's what most children feel like when they're stuck in a shoe, when they're stuck in society. Then Neruda tells you what happens. When the foot is in the shoe, what happens to the foot? He says, these soft nails. The nails of a baby are so flexible, nice and pink, very soft. They're made out of quartz, but they look pink and they look almost transparent. They get bunched together in the shoe. How can you not bunch your toes together because you're stuck in a shoe? They grow hard. These nails, because they don't get enough energy, don't get enough sunlight, enough fresh air, they grow hard. And they change themselves into an opaque substance. Opaque means you cannot see through it. When they were young, you could almost see through the nails. But when you get older, you can't see through the nails. They grow opaque and hard as horn. Everybody knows a bull horn or a horn of some buffalo is very hard. You don't want to get stuck with a horn. It can be very dangerous, very hard. And the tiny petaled toes of the child grow bunched and out of trim. When he's young, they're all coordinated, they're all together, they look beautiful. But as you get older, they get to be different lengths, different sizes, and they don't look like they're trimmed and nice. And then eventually, they take on the form of eyeless reptiles. Reptiles, it's part of nature, but they're not the prettiest part of nature. We have snakes and we have lizards, and they're okay, but they're not beautiful. And so the beautiful toes turn into these eyeless reptiles. The reptiles have no eyes. They're looking out at you. These toes, they're looking out at you, but they look like a reptile with triangular heads. In fact, the toes quit being a nice square shape. They get to be a little triangular in shape, and they start to look like worms. And worms are okay, but they're not beautiful. So the child is watching his feet grow into pretty ugly feet as the adult gets older, especially when he gets in retirement and gets much older. Later, they grow calloused. These toes scrape against each other. The end of the toes get calloused, just like your heel gets calloused. Callus, as you know, is a hard part of your skin. It gets very hard. And that way you can walk on it, it doesn't hurt, but you don't feel very much through a callus. And these toes and feet, they're covered with the faint volcanoes of death. As you look at them, they look more lifeless all the time. Instead of being pink and vibrant, they get grayish and old. And they look like a volcano of death. That's the term that is used by Neruda here. And this, he points out, is a coarsening. A coarsening makes, instead of being soft and nice, it gets hard and firm and coarse. And this coarsening is hard to accept. As Pablo Neruda was 46 to 50 years old as he's writing this poem, he's saying, I don't particularly like this life. I don't like the fact that we get so coarse. I think we should have more joy. In fact, the whole poem and the people that translate the poem are trying to get us to see that life does not have to be this way. It can be more joy. We can have more inspiration. We can have more imagination. He goes on, but this blind thing walks without respite. Respite is a break. You know, we work for 2 hours when we get to work, we take a coffee break. We need a respite. We work for another 2 hours, we take a lunch break. We need a respite. A respite is a break in the action. It's a time to refresh. Then we work another couple hours, we take an afternoon coffee break, and then we go home. But we've worked all day, and the respite is very small compared to the working hours. He's saying this thing walks without respite, never stopping for hour after hour, with the one foot, the other. So it keeps going. And this is actually a compliment to the average person. When this was written in 1950, back then the work week was much longer, 40 to 45 hours. Some people would work even longer than that. And these people would keep going to work and keep going no matter how hard it was. They would keep walking, one foot after another. Then he goes on and he says, now the man's, now the woman's. What difference does it make? Okay? The man has a job, the woman has a job. They have to keep walking, one foot after the other. Up above, some people have jobs that go up. They live in these high rises. They go up to high rises, okay? And they have restaurants on top. Or he says down below. You can go down in the basement of these high rises. They have shops down there. When I had my first job after I graduated out of law school, I worked for a very expensive title insurance company, but I was 2 stories below the ground. My office had no windows in it. And that's the way some people work for years and years. They go below. And then he says, even if you go through fields, you're working outside, you're in a field, but you still need to have shoes on. There's thorns there, there's rocks there, there's so many things. You need to have shoes when you're working out on the farm. Mines. Some people have to work in coal mines or in copper mines or diamond mines, okay? But these mines, you have to go way down in the earth. You need to have the right shoes on. Your feet can get cut and hurt in so many ways. Markets. He includes markets here. How many markets do we have? We have markets for food. We have markets for clothes. We have markets for everything. And in every market, there's salespeople. And they go on and they sell everything. But they have to bring the produce to the people to sell it. So they have to walk. And they're walking all the time. And ministries. It was nice that Pablo Neruda included this, okay? Because he has a spiritual side to this poem, as we get to later on. After a while, after you work so long and you work so hard and you're wondering what your life is about, you go to a ministry. Okay, and the minister hopefully has a bigger idea of life and why you were really born. And that's to go towards higher truths, enlightenment, towards God. And so the ministries, even though they're ministers and they have big congregations or small congregations, they all have shoes. They have to walk with these shoes. They're not free. Backwards. Sometimes you go backwards in life. You have a job, you get a new job, and they fire you in the new job, you go back to your old job. Far afield. Some people have a job, they get to be an airline pilot or an airline stewardess, okay? And they fly all around the world. They go far afield. They're so far away from home. Inward. Some people have a nice job. They can reflect. Look what's happening here with Pablo Neruda. He reflected so much, he thought about his life so much and the life of other people, that he changed his name. He wanted to have a name that more reflected the beauty of his life. Forward. And so what does life do? It does not tarry in yesterday. It goes forward. Life keeps going. And that's why in this poem, you'll see the child eventually, after he passes away and gets into the grave, he's looking forward to a new life. Life keeps going forward. To this foot toils in the shoe. The foot is always working in the shoe, okay? It's not having a good time. In the shoe, it's doing some kind of work. And then Neruda says, look, scarcely, the word scarcely means hardly ever, very scarce, 1 in a million, scarcely taking time to bear itself in love or sleep. So the foot is in the shoe all the time. It has just a few minutes to get out of the shoe when it's stopping to love its child. You know how you'll sit on the couch and you bring your son over and ask him about his day, and the son or the daughter jumps on the couch and takes their shoes off. They have bare feet. But this is very scarce, very little time. Or sleep. You can't wear your shoes to sleep, although some people have fallen asleep with their shoes on. So we want to be very careful, as much time as we can, to have our shoes off. This is very important because this is the little time that Pablo is saying we have for our joy, and we should have more. The whole story really goes to the point that we should have more time to enjoy things. Now, it walks and they walk until the whole man chooses to stop. What does this line mean? They keep walking, they keep moving, they keep going in society until finally what happens? The man stops. He dies. But interesting here, he says the man chooses to stop. They walk. He chooses to stop. Before we talk about the man and or the woman who dies, let's go back to the scarcity, okay? The scarcity of taking time. Scarcely taking time to bear itself in love or sleep. When we first started the poem, the foot had an idea of being flying or being an apple. And this was written in 1950, before the time of skateboards and power skiing and bungee jumping. Many young people today, okay, young adults and teenagers, love to be in the air. In fact, they buy these gym shoes to get more air. So this idea that Neruda was saying to have more freedom, okay, has been caught on by later succeeding generations. Now we'll go to walking and walking. So they keep living, they keep working without having much time to do what they really want to do. And then they choose to stop. Okay, whether it's a conscious choice or an unconscious choice, the man or the woman stops. And this is what they refer to as death. Your soul leaves the body. It's done with this body. And it says the man chooses to stop. Do we really have a choice? How can we take our next breath? But it's interesting that Pablo says you have a choice. You can choose when you want to stop. And so most people, as they get older, they said, I've had enough of this life. And they choose not to keep going. And then once that body is no longer breathing, then it is descended, okay? Most people, especially in 1950, would have a grave. A grave is a 3-foot by 6-foot piece of ground, and they bury you 6 feet underneath. And so the body gets descended into this grave. It goes underground. But the foot, which is really the life of the person, is unaware. For there, everything was dark. And you notice that Neruda says everything twice. Unless you've studied what's going to happen when you pass away, and you know what to expect, everything will be very dark when you pass away. You will see no light, and you will just wait like a seed to be reborn again. And it never knew that it had ceased to be a foot. The poor foot now is 6 feet under, okay, has no light whatsoever, and it doesn't even know now that it's not a foot. It has not much consciousness, okay? Or, he says, if they were burying it so that it could fly or it could become an apple. So the foot now has a certain sense of freedom. Once you've left your physical body, then you can go back to being a lighter body, an atmic body, and think about beautiful thoughts and wait for a new lifetime. So the overall tone of this poem is sad but hopeful. Neruda is saying, please pay attention to what I'm writing here. 2 lines, I give you your hopes and wishes and imagination. For the rest of the poem, I'm telling you, you're going to get older and you're going to pass away. And then what will you do? So, interesting, during the poem, he uses contrast. He contrasts the time between being a young child and an adult, or even past that. The contrast happens on a physical level with the foot. When the child is young, the foot has no awareness. It wants to fly. But when it's an adult, it knows it cannot fly. It cannot be a fruit. When it's young, it has soft nails, nice and sweet and pretty. When he's older, these nails get hard as a horn and bunched together. When the foot is small, okay, it looks like a flower, tiny petaled toes. But when it gets older, they look like eyeless reptiles, very old and ugly. And nobody likes to even look at these feet. So the impact of this life, okay, is very hard, and it shows in the foot with these physical changes. So now we have the poem completed, but it hasn't been translated. It was written in Spanish, all right, and went out to a lot of people. And there was a man named Alistair Reid who was born in 1926. He's probably still alive. He's one of Scotland's foremost literary figures, admired as a craftsman in poetry, prose, and translation. He was a master of translation. He had the ability to see the poetic works of other poets and authors and realize that these works have to be translated into other languages, especially English, which is now sweeping the world. So he translated this poem into English. And when Reid left Scotland during World War II, he lived in various places. He lived in Spain, France, Switzerland, the United States, and South America. He published over 40 books, okay, including essays, poetry, children's books, translations of many distinguished poets. His publications included Weathering in 1978, a book of his early selected poems, and Oases, an oasis of truth, in 1997, a collection of prose and poetry describing his friendship with writers such as Neruda and Borges. So he could appreciate real poetry, and he wants us to have that appreciation. As we talked about before, there's 3 ways to live your life. You can live your life learning the hard way, which is your own experiences. You could find some teacher or poet or author like Shakespeare who has lived before and is a very advanced soul, and you can go to their plays and poems and learn about life and not have to go to these physical experiences. Or the ideal way is to pray inside and get a direct communication, but that takes a little bit of effort. So we have our friend Reid here that does this translation. And he does the translation because he looked at this poem and he realized that this was a cynical view of life. He said that Neruda was really criticizing how people treat children, and they force children to grow in society and forget their dreams and imaginations. And so Reid wanted people, since he was born later, to have more freedom. And this is actually what Neruda wants. He wants the adults to give the children more freedom to be really who they are. Now let's go through the glossary that we've learned in this poem. The first word that is new for us is quartz. Quartz is a hard, white, colorless mineral consisting of silicon dioxide. And quartz is opaque, O-P-A-Q-U-E. It's not transparent. So the toes of the child go from being transparent to almost seeing through them to opaque. And then petaled. Petaled means like petals, like flower petals. An easy word. Callus, we've talked about that. That's the hardening of and thickening of a part of the skin. And respite is a short period of rest. A very good word to have. Now, since we've gone through the poem, there's 7 questions I'd like us to contemplate and to consider. And I'd like the students, especially my class, to write 1 paragraph, complete answers about these questions. The first question this poet brings up is, we think of a foot as part of a human body. But Neruda says, to the foot from its child. Explain. What is Neruda trying to convey here? Actually, the child and the foot are not talking. It's a teacher, it's an advanced teacher, talking to the foot as if it's alive, as if it's the life of the child. So I want you to explain what you have derived from this, what this poetic license is that he has done to use a metaphor of the foot being the whole life of the child. The second question I'd like you to consider is, pick out the expressions that suggest the child's imagination is fertile. Okay? During the poem, he's made many suggestions. Apples, things like that. pick out those expressions and show that the child wants to be more than just a person walking in a shoe. The next question I want you to consider is the poem begins with the idea that the child's foot, is not yet aware that it's a foot. At the end, the foot is unaware that it has ceased to be a foot. What is the poet trying to convey through these statements? Okay, this is the heavy question. The foot signifies the child and is innocent and works hard. And without dreams and games, it has to give those up when it starts to work hard. It shows the harsh treatment of children, and they can't live their lives until they get reborn again. And this is what Neruda and Reed want you to contemplate. The next question is, examine this poem, how it works the contrast between the colorful dreams and the humdrum reality of life. The dreams of the child and young people, they have so many dreams, so many imaginations of what they can do. But most lives turn out to be some humdrum 9-to-5 type of job in which they get tired and they choose to leave their life instead of extending their life in a beautiful way. And then the next question is, Neruda's poem is a salute to ordinary human beings who continue life against all odds. Do you agree? What are your reasons? So he's saying, these people keep walking. They're in the shoe, but they keep walking. They keep going up and down ladders, ahead, going ahead. They don't stop. They keep on going. So in the 1950s, especially in Chile, they were hardworking people, and his hat went off to them. But he thought at that time, and what he wants us to contemplate, is could there be an easier way where we can fulfill more of our dreams, okay, and do other things besides just working? And the last one I want you to consider is the foot is a key word in the poem. Comment on Neruda's skillful use of the word and its association in terms of imagery to convey his ideas. So we're using the foot as an image of life, and we're getting away from the cyclical view of life. We want, he's showing us the cycle. The cycle goes from birth, and then we go into infancy, and then we mature. Then we go into adulthood, and we start working very hard. Then we get to old age, and the foot gets even more brittle and hard, and looks like death. We go through death, and then we go through rebirth. So we would like to have, with these authors, a bigger perspective of life, and to have a vision of enlightenment so that when we get buried, okay, we don't have just darkness everywhere. We have some light, and we know what to expect and where we're going. Thank you for your nice attention to this class. Om Saram.